research. She is a mother, a wife, and she has 3 boys. Oh boy, that keeps you busy. She is a diligent worker and applied into the spirit of her work as a physician. She specializes in training the has extensive experience in the diagnosis and treatment of epilepsy. She is co-owner of Kingdom Healing Institute and also would share that she has her bachelor's in neuroscience and a doctor of medicine from the University of Virginia. She went on to complete an internship in internal medicine at Rush University and did her neurology residence at Yale in 2013. So can we welcome Dr. Musa? Okay. Our next distinguished panelist is someone that I am intimately know and have worked with, and that is Dr. Diana Burns Banks. She is a board certified pediatrician with over 35 years of experience and co-owner of South Texas Center for Pediatric Care here in San Antonio with multiple locations and over 100 employees. She's a native of Mississippi, and she received her BA from Xavier University and her MD from the University of Louisville with a master's in health administration. Dr. Burns has a passion for children and a passion for mental health. She is past president of the Bexar County Medical Society, past chief of staff for Santa Rosa Hospital, and served as vice chairman of the board for Center for Healthcare Services here in San Antonio. She is a champion of the integration of mental health and physical health because she feels that that's essential to providing effective health care in our communities. Dr. Burns currently serves as the board of managers at the University Health System as an appointee of County Commissioner Tommy Calver. Dr. Burns serves as a board member of Lift Fund and Our Lady of the Lake. Numerous awards and achievements. She has 2 wonderful sons. She is a grandmother of 2 grandsons, and her son Michael is a West Point graduate and a former Apache pilot, and her son Jonathan is a graduate of Georgetown Law and a former partner with the private practice in a law firm in Washington, D.C. Just to share a little bit about Dr. Burns. She is also a member of Holy Redeemer Catholic Church and a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Diana Burns Banks. And of course, we have the lone gentleman on our panel today, and that is Dr. Morris Stribling. Someone else that I am intimately familiar with. He's responsible for this boot on my foot. No, I'm responsible for the boot. He's just helping to help it get better. But at any rate, Dr. Stribling is a native of Buffalo, New York, and he got to Texas as fast as he could. He graduated from Consensus College with a BA in biology and is a graduate of Temple School of Podiatry. He has completed a surgical residency in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Dr. Stribling is president of Foot Care of Central San Antonio and has been in private practice for over 35 years. There's some synergy with that number 35. Dr. Stribling is the owner of the Foot Store and Spa, a retail outlet that sells and specializes in shoes and foot healthcare products. Dr. Stribling is also president of the Alamo Ambulatory Surgical Center, an office-based surgical suite, as well as DMS Pharmacy. So as you can see, we have some very busy people that took time out on their Friday afternoon to be here with us today. Dr. Stribling is a member of the American Pediatric Medical Association, and he is also a co-author of textbooks on foot surgery and a clinical instructor for the University of Texas Health Science Center Orthopedic Department and Podiatry Division. He is formerly the national chairman and lecturer for the Scientific Committee on National Pediatric Medical Association. I also know that Dr. Stribling is active at Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, where he is a deacon, and he is also a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. He founded the annual Harmon and Harriet Kelly Art Show and served on the Antioch Christian Academy board. He is the past chairman of the board. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Morris Stribling. So, I'd like to start off this afternoon by particularly asking our three distinguished panelists what got them or made them decide that they would go into the field of medicine. Dr. Newsom?
Well, I honestly think that it was a passion of mine since I was a very, very young girl, and also my environment. Full disclosure, my father was also a physician. My mother was a registered nurse, so I grew up in this very medical environment. But it's a desire that God put in my heart. Very young in my journey, I would ask my parents funny questions like, what does your brain do when it's sleeping? I would wonder, different emotions, where are those emotions housed in your brain? And so all of these different questions and desires eventually evolved into an interest in medicine and specifically neuroscience and neurology.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Burns.
Okay, I think I might not be as scientifically motivated. I think I grew up in the South, and I think my biggest motivation was to be a doctor, not necessarily a pediatrician. But as time has gone on, I felt my mission was to advocate for children. And the best way to advocate for children who are disadvantaged was through medicine, to give them a fair chance. So I think that was my whole vision for medicine. It's not actually to see patients, but to improve patient care.
Okay. And Dr. Stribling.
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, I always wanted to be a doctor. I can't point to a particular person who influenced me that way, but it was just something that I wanted to do. I was always interested in science, and I knew early on, even when I was in high school, that I wanted to be a physician. And so I pursued it, and with the backing of my parents and my family, I was able to accomplish it.
Okay, thank you very much. Because the overarching issue that we know that we are dealing with or that we're dealing in our community has to do with health disparities, I'd like to ask our panelists, what do you feel is driving the wedge or the paradigm of racial disparities in our community?
That is a very multifaceted question, but I would say, there's a lot of generational oppression and also disparities that have manifested societally. So one would be just a lack of access to good health care. It may be due to socioeconomic disparities or just a lack of education and knowledge, when it's appropriate to seek out medical help. There may be even a lack of trust within the healthcare, system, just because of all of the issues and the historical oppression that the Black community has faced. So I would say a lack of trust, a lack of access, and just a lack of education as to when to seek help.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Burns.
I guess maybe I agree with everything that Dr. said. I think it's probably very complicated when we talk about healthcare disparity. First of all, it's a social issue that we need to address. It's an economic issue that needs to be addressed, and not just, it's particularly just a racial issue. I know when we talk about healthcare disparities, we have to look at these social determinants of health, the way the communities we live in, the lack of food sources, the fact that we are Black is probably one of the major factors that causes healthcare disparity, and the way we look at ourselves and the way the community looks at it judges us. So I think it's a matter of education, but it's also a matter that being Black is a stress, and that stress creates an inequality in our health status.
Okay, Dr. Strickland.
Thank you. Yeah, my understanding of healthcare disparities has probably reached a different level the longer I'm in practice. And when I look back on some of the areas that I was involved with, for example, years ago, I was on the Board of Health for the city of San Antonio, and every year they used to send us information on disparities, health disparities, and it was by zip code. And zip codes that had people of color had more healthcare disparities, and it was done on purpose. And so what I begun to find out was that there was a reason behind redlining, making sure that Black and brown people live in certain neighborhoods. And in those neighborhoods, there were food deserts. In those neighborhoods, there was no real access to health care. And people try to blame you because you're Black that you don't go to a doctor. But if the whole system is built against you, ultimately, when you look at the disease states like diabetes, hypertension, mental health disease, the reason that it affects us more often is done on purpose, and it's embedded in racism. And that's a hard thing to come to grips with, but it's true. I was just at the National Medical Association national meeting in New Orleans, and the whole conversation was about healthcare disparities. And as it relates to my specialty in particular, we talked about the number of amputation on African Americans as opposed to whites. And that is something that happens to us because we are Black. It's not because our health is necessarily worse, but we get amputated much more than if you were white.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Strickland, and I think Dr. Rousseau had some additional
I wanted to piggyback on that, and I completely agree with everything these doctors are saying, that it's definitely something that's societal. It's because of the appearance of our skin, our Blackness. It's because of racism. I would go a step further and say it's not just socioeconomic disparities, but you can actually see epigenetic changes within the African American population as a result of generational trauma. It stems from slavery, and it can actually turn on certain genes and increase the likelihood of certain chronic illnesses like hypertension, cardiometabolic disease, eventually amputations. So it's very multifaceted. It's something that can be reversed. I completely believe in that, and we can get into that. So, but I wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. I think that allows us to step into a topic that Dr. Burns and I speak a lot about, and she has a lot of information and knowledge when we talk about the social determinants of health, and the ACEs.
And so again, we talk about, again, it is a very multifaceted process. And I think the other thing that Francine and I mentioned is a lot of, when we talk about amputations, we're talking about intrinsic bias. Sometimes we all have intrinsic bias, and our healthcare is really faulty with it. So when they see that Black patient with diabetes, the doctor might automatically think that they're going to be non-compliant in that. So their decision is made on that. Those are things that it takes a while for us to correct. But when we look at all of the issues that contribute to our health care, some of them things that we can correct. And I spoke with Francine this morning when we talked about some things that help our health. I can look around this room. We know 150 minutes is good exercise. How many in this room can say they spend 150 minutes every week exercising? Probably most of us can. Except, okay, we can. But those things are yeah, kidding. But those things that we can actually do for ourselves. So when we talk about healthcare disparities, it's obviously a lot of this racial, a lot of this we've been discriminated, a lot of it's our heritage, and I believe it's the stress of being Black. All of this is part of it. But there are some things that we as African Americans, as Black people, can take ownership of. We need to be advocates for ourselves. We need to learn to ask a question when somebody talks to us about healthcare. And that takes a matter of education, and that takes a matter of changing our mindset. We're not used to questioning me. Even as bold as you might be on the street, when you walk into the doctor's office, you become timid. So we need to learn to advocate for ourselves.
So along those lines, Dr. Burns, as I shared, Dr. Burns is a pediatrician, but I want to share some numbers about life expectancy in birth and years by race and ethnicity. And then we can talk a little bit about birth rate in terms of expecting mothers and what's happening in that regard. Dr. Musa can speak because she sees a multifaceted age of patients. And then, of course, Dr. Strickland in podiatry, the same thing. He sees young people, all the way to elder. But in 2021, the overall life expectancy in the United States was 76.1 years of age. Now, for whites, that number is 76.4, and for African Americans, that number is 70.8. For Hispanic, 77.7. And for our Asian brothers and sisters, that number is 83.5. So if you look at the spectrum, the longest life expectancy is for Asians, and the least life expectancy is for African Americans at the age of 70.8. Now, note these are averages. I'm going to let medical professionals weigh in a little bit on that. Dr. Musa.
Well, I think that life expectancy, again, is multifaceted. So for African Americans, it's the lowest. I think it likely is due to just cultural effects as well as, again, these disparities in access to good medical care and lack of trust. In our social circles, it's not something that I haven't seen it in my medical career as exercise and watching what you eat as something that has been paramount within the African American population. I think that it is something that is improving, but it's an uphill battle with regards to culture. So, diets that are sugar, carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, lack of exercise, these are all things that I see, and I see population of patients that I treat, I do see a higher incidence of stroke, which is secondary to cardiovascular disease and high cholesterol, and also hypertension. Same thing with cardiometabolic disease, chronic kidney failure as a result of hypertension and diabetes. Some of these things are hereditary. Some of them, are genetic. But again, I do think a lot of these issues are epigenetic, and it's either a transgenerational effect on your genes that will turn on and off certain genes that predispose you to these illnesses, or you have this perpetuating cycle with, like Dr. Burns said, you have all of this stress as a result of continued racism, and it is a feedback loop that perpetuates this genetic predisposition to these diseases, and you can pass it down from generation to generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Burns.
I think something fascinating in that data is that brown people actually their life expectancy in Spanish is greater than black. We always group ourselves as minorities, but in conversation we wonder why that is a significant difference. And part of that, the research shows, is that more family support, that Hispanics and people of Hispanic descent are more supportive of each other, and that shows that social support actually also enables us to improve our health care. And I guess that's a lesson for people of color. And we were talking a minute ago about the Montgomery thing, what happened in Montgomery. It was not that we all condoned violence, but we celebrated Black people coming together. And that is something very strange that we in 2023 here are celebrating Black people coming together. And all of the stresses and all of the things that we have gone through, we are still not together. And we know from just from the number looking at our life expectancy, we have all the other issues, but that internal support actually would increase our life expectancy.
That is very true in terms of what Dr. Risa said about all of these generational, the opportunity that it is generational. But in doing the research and looking at the Asian American community and why is it that they have the longer life expectancy, the information that was listed was tied to family, food, of course, diet, but also it reiterated over and over again about closeness of family. They often have generational members that live in a household together, and about how they take care of each other, and especially the reverence given to elders. So, Dr. Stewart, your thoughts?
Thank you. Well, I'm gonna hurry up and get my answer, because according to your statistics, I'm almost dead. So I'm gonna go ahead and give my answer. Well, the other aspect of this is the healthcare delivery system. Everybody does not have an opportunity to get health insurance. I see a lot of patients who are on what's called the Methodist Healthcare Delivery System through the nonprofit arm of Methodist Hospital. And these are people that they can't even get Medicaid. And so you can exercise, you can do all the right things in terms of your diet, but if you come up with an illness, which most of us will, because the human body is only 35% efficient. And so when you do have to go to the doctor and you have little to no insurance, and even if you have the card and it says you got a $25 copay, but these billion-dollar companies that own these insurance companies, they make sure that they're not going to pay little to nothing, especially when you have some kind of serious health disease. So that's the other aspect of the healthcare delivery system that attacks us, and it does affect people of color more, but everybody in America is at a complete disadvantage because of our insurance industry.
And just make a comment about the insurance industry. I think it is obviously a very much a flawed system working now. We're trying to get toward a place where the incentive is to give good health care. And it's hard for us as providers to realize that insurance companies are just money-making machines. They are not about interested in anything else. But they have no incentive to give bad health care because bad health care is expensive. So the insurance companies are incentivized to make sure you get all your checkups, all your mammograms, your GI screening, because if they can pick up a cancer early, it saves them money. And medicine now is shifting from a fee-for-service model to an incentivized model, a different type of model. I think in the long run, if I agree with Dr. Mercer that we don't have access to care. If we can get access to care with the changes in medicine, maybe we will be able to get good care because nobody will be incentivized to give us less than good care. And it's all about the dollar. So at the end of the day, we'll have an advantage of taking of the insurance company's greed.
I agree with that. Me and my husband were called out of our normal 9-to-5 job to start a nonprofit medical ministry to address gaps in healthcare. So we completely bypassed insurance because of the health delivery issues that these doctors had brought up. And we serve an underserved population in San Antonio. The clinics are free, and our vision actually is to include health coaching and preventative medicine into the way we care for these patients, so that it's not just an in and out thing. I'm going to write you this prescription, see you back in 6 months, but this patient is morbidly obese. It will include lifestyle interventions and different interventions that will help to reverse preventable disease.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Newsom. And maybe it would be helpful if everybody has their pen, paper, smartphone, or whatever, is to get some specifics about that, where you are, what you all are offering, because Dr. Burns often talks about it's one thing for us to offer a solution or an answer. Well, what happens long term? What's the next step after the deliverable is delivered? Even today, after we have these conversations, then what's next? What do we do? What do we put in action so that it is not just a deliverable? So, did you want to share some specifics about that for our audience today?
About the nonprofit?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We started in 2018. At that time, we were called the Deliverance Free Clinic, located on the south side. I actually gave up my private practice space to house this, and we just grew by word of mouth. We were serving free food. It was kind of a safe place for people, and we were seeing up to maybe 20 to 30 patients within a 4-hour window. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, we had to pause due to safety concerns. We had a pretty sizable volunteer force, but nobody knew what was going on. So 2 weeks turned to about 1.5 years, but God really put it on our hearts that, San Antonio needs this. And there's so many people who are indigent, who don't have insurance, they cannot afford insurance, and they need good primary care. So we started doing pop-up clinics in partnership with different ministries and churches. And praise report, we have the grand opening in the south side on 600 Amber Street. This grand opening will be August 25th at 11 a.m. and it's also going to coincide with a fundraiser. And so we're super excited, and now we have a home base. But we're still going to do the traveling clinics in concert with this, but the home base is going to give more consistency, and they'll, the word of mouth will spread better that way.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that Mr. Booker is in the loop on all of that and will be advertising and sharing that information, right?
Well, I'll make sure
Okay.
There's some questions.
Okay. Have a question? Oh, what is the name?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's called the Kingdom Healthcare System.
I think we need to have some professional help.
Yeah, I think for me, it's some of it's personal. In my practice, I think probably 30% of my patients come from group homes, and we set aside time for them on purpose because that's a group that is ostracized to a great degree. And then my son has pervasive developmental disorder, which is a form of autism. And so my wife and I had to go through all of the hoops that you have to go through when you have a child that has a mental illness. And it was a tough start, but we stuck with him, and we really had to fight through the system to make sure that he got everything that he needed in order to function. And now he works full time at USAA, and we're very proud of him. But that was something that we had to experience on a personal level. And then it led to me in my private practice to set aside at least, and I think we see about 30% of my practice patients are patients that have mental health disorders. And I think that's about right. My office manager is sitting back there. I think that's about correct on a percentage basis.
Okay, Dr. Ms.
As a neurologist, there's a lot of overlap with mental health disorders, and the way I treat patients is holistic. You know, there are so many definitions of what holistic is. It's not hocus pocus. It's really just treating the patient as a whole and taking into account their social struggles, their mental health struggles, maybe even their spiritual struggles, and any physical manifestations. A lot of times people come in with a medical or physical complaint like seizure, migraine, even a stomach ache. And I would say a lot of medical professionals need to really understand how the lines are blurred from a psychological issue to a physical issue. Sometimes these psychological issues can manifest physically, and telltale signs would be completely normal scans or workup. We call that a conversion disorder, where a mental anguish is manifesting as something that would be medical. And I would say culturally, I know coming from an African background, it's much more acceptable to have a physical ailment like a headache than depression. But we have to consider the root cause may be mental health.
Right, which is what Dr. Burns was saying.
And I think the other thing, and this is where insurance is really great from what their purpose is, because mental health is not funded. I don't get paid like I do to see somebody who has double pain, comes in with double pain. So it's not funded, there's no parity. The concern about mental health is not curable. Generally, you can be depressed and you can get some treatment and you can be depressed again. If you have prostate cancer, I can treat you and you're done. So I think the idea, and that's where it really is important that we as individuals get out and advocate and push insurances and push politicians that we need mental health parity. That when they pay for diabetes, they need to pay for depression, and they do not need.
Did they hear you? What was that, Dr. Burns? Your last statement?
I said they should not limit the number of visits to 6 visits because of to treat depression, because we need parity, and that is why we need to advocate to our politicians and to the people who make those decisions for us.
Okay, thank you. I think we got some answers from that from all levels, with Dr. Stribley speaking about it from a personal perspective, Dr. Burns from the perspective of in our pediatric world, the transition that has happened since COVID and ongoing of the type of patients that we see and what the issues were during COVID. I would also add that you said that about COVID. Life expectancy across the board changed by about 2.7 years due to COVID-19. So if you understand what I'm saying, is that COVID took 2.7 years off of all of those averages that we're talking about. And in particularly for our youth, I know many of you can say and understand what happened with young people being out of school for those periods of time, what that did for depression and anxiety. I have an educator sitting here on the front row, Dr. Diop, that can certainly speak to what that did in our educational system over that period of time. But also would like to talk a little bit about, Dr. Burns, when we talk about the birth rates and birth weights and birth rates of children, and then of course Dr. was saying seeing women and what issues come into play for us as African American women if we don't advocate for ourselves. So when we talk about is our culture killing us, certainly at the top of that list for women as we talk about pregnancies and birth rates and all of that. Can we delve into that a little bit?
Sure. As a woman myself, I don't specialize in OBGYN or peds, but I know some of the statistics, and they're not favorable to Black women in America. I'll share a short story. When I was pregnant myself, I was suffering from something called preeclampsia, and they had to deliver the baby a bit earlier than the due date, so I went in for a C-section. And from start to finish, I really understood what racism and disparity was. I went in for the procedure. It was almost like they did not see me. There were so many mistakes that were made, I think just because of just lack of attention. There's a tendency to minimize symptoms that are coming from a Black woman. And honestly, I think my outcome would have been much worse if I did not have a physician husband who was right there by my side, looking over everybody's shoulder. So everyone doesn't have a physician husband. I would maybe, if I don't know if they can incorporate doulas into childbirth or some sort of advocate, including family members that are just there to watch over these women.
So before you pass the torch to Dr. Burns, on my mind and on my heart is to say we are our brothers and sisters keepers. So is our culture killing us? It can if we are not our brother and our sister's keepers. That daughter in the room, that son in the room, that husband in the room, that wife in the room, that friend in the room, somebody in the room advocating if the patient cannot. Dr. Burns.
I agree wholeheartedly that advocacy is probably the most important thing from a statistical standpoint. Black women have a higher prematurity rate. The prematurity rate among Black women is about 16% compared to about 10% among white women. Now, and that is across economic scale. So it's not that I have everything. I'm financially stable. I have I have an increased risk of having a premature baby. And in fact, in history, my two sons were born a little bit under 37 weeks, which is what we intended, which we state as a premature. So it is some risk factors there that we don't really know what it is, but it is very important that we advocate for ourselves because we are kind of viewed, like women are viewed as a little bit not as approachable. We talked about Serena Phillips having problems post her pregnancy, and the doctors ignored her, not paying attention. She has some blood clots, but they didn't pay attention, and they tend not to pay attention to us as Black women. So it is again, and I think the key for anything that goes on is healthcare. We need to stop and ask a question. Do not let somebody talk to you in terms that you have no idea. I pose anybody, a doctor who talks to you in terms that you can't understand is probably not a good doctor. Probably is insecure because I need to make sure my patient understands exactly what I'm doing. So I think, again, advocacy, have somebody in the room. Don't ever stand there by yourself and never just accept what they say. If you have a question, ask them.
So, Dr. Strickland, I think on this subject, we're talking about women and birth and all that, but I think the conversation that allows you to go deeper with this about advocacy is what you had shared with me about the amputations and all of those things that you had a meeting and got some further in-depth conversation about amputees.
Yeah, there's a good point about that. But about women, when my wife had all three of her kids, I paid the bill. That's what that was it.
See that we need you to go further, man. We need you to
go
be
further
there in
than
the
paying
room.
the bill.
Yeah, we need you to
I was in the room, held her hand.
Okay, we need
Is that
more.
good? Need more than that?
Yes, we need more than
You
that.
need to ask the questions.
Ask the question. That's right. Well, I mean, I think for us it was a little bit different. We knew who our OBGYN was and those kind of things, so we didn't really have those kind of issues, but I do recognize how difficult it can be for a woman when she's going through pregnancy and those kind of things. And especially if it's a woman who's single and she doesn't have a husband and she does not have a strong support system. And so I think for the rest of us, we can aid in that respect if we know someone is in that situation. And I'm just extremely impressed by what you've done with your nonprofit. That's an excellent thing to do, and that has to come from nothing but the Lord to do something like that when you are trained as a physician, but you turn your practice into a nonprofit. So I commend you for that. But I do understand the topic now as it relates to amputation. It doesn't really affect it by gender, but what I've seen is that Black people get more amputations than people that are not of color, but it does happen more to women who are single that are Black. I had a lady in my office a few weeks ago, and we did what's called an ABI test to test her circulation. I sent her to a vascular doctor, and she came back and she said, well, they told me they have to amputate my leg. So I sent her to another doctor, but I called the physician first, and I said, we did testing. Her circulation is compromised, but it's not impaired. And so that doctor went on and did a bypass and saved her leg. But if she had just listened to that first doctor, they would have done an amputation. And that's the kind of thing that we have to be cognizant of, especially when it comes to people of color and especially women.
Thank you. Dr.
I guess how does that not happen? Because that happens quite often. People of color, with every patient, they never ask another question. Dr. says.
Right, that's true. Because the thinking is when you go to a doctor, they're going to be perfectly honest with you. But you can go into a room and that person is a physician, but that person can be a racist. And there are certain preconceived notions when somebody of color goes into a healthcare delivery system and the options that you are given are different. And so Black people in particular, you need to be very careful and do not be afraid to ask questions. And I'll tell you this too, if you can, and it's just my personal opinion, if you can, find you a qualified African-American doctor, because more than likely, they're gonna look out for what's in your best interest. And that's something that a lot of us don't do. Sometimes I'll have patients come to my office and they're telling me everything the white man told them, and it's wrong. And so we have to be careful about that and make sure that you do your own research, not asking you to be Dr. Google, but you have to find out as much as you can about your health situation so you can ask intelligent, informed questions.
I think that's one of the things we talk about, competency, cultural competency is very important. We have to have people who look like us to take care of us.
So, with that being said, let me just reiterate what Dr. Stribling has said, what Dr. Burns has said, and what Dr. Musa has said. Let me go a step further and say, ladies and gentlemen, there are very competent optometrists, podiatrists, pediatricians, general practitioners, on and on and on of African American color here in San Antonio, Texas, that could be your doctor, your brother's doctor, your cousin's doctor, your mama and your daddy's doctor. Let's seek them out. Let's look for them, because people of color, as you heard Dr. Stribling say, are going to know us. They're going to understand our issues and our medical issues. And in a different way. So we are our brother's keeper, and we need to think about that when we say, is our culture killing us? In closing, I would also like to say and recognize Dr. Musa for her nonprofit, Dr. Diana Burns Banks for over 35 years of treating the children in this community in the city of San Antonio, and to Dr. Morris Stribling for over 35 years in podiatry. And I can personally say, as a patient, in being in the waiting room and seeing those children or young people, patients that are nonverbal and that have mental issues, I sat there in the office and I thought, you know, we can always say, but by the grace of God go I. It can be your child, your sister, your brother. So I know that it takes special medical care to see those kinds of children. And the thousands of children that Dr. Diana Burns has seen over 35 years. And sometimes we know we don't get paid. Okay, I know Dr. Stribling can shake his head to that. I know Dr. Burns can shake her head because I worked for her for 15 years. And sometimes we don't get paid. And Dr. Musa is doing a nonprofit, so we know that, you know, what that looks like and what that means. But again, we are our brother's keepers. Dr. Musa, Dr. Burns, Dr. Stribling, I would allow you to have closing remarks, and then we will end this. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I would just say, just to echo, you are your brother's keeper, and to have a community, you need to operate in love, and to think, well, what would I do if this was my mother or my sister or my brother, and just operate that way. It doesn't matter if you're high up in the system or someone that's receiving care.
Thank you.
I guess I would close with saying that as we sit here, we are all each other's keeper. We should be advocating for each other, and we should not have a Montgomery episode to celebrate our togetherness. So I think mental health is so much part of our physical health. We need to give ourselves permission not to be perfect, and it is okay. So I want to thank Francine, and I want to thank the other panelists for bringing some issues that are so important to us. But I always want to challenge us to what is next. We do 100 health fairs, and we leave here with great intentions, minimal knowledge, and very little implementation. So I think we as a people, we need to say, what is next? How will we take charge of our faith? Like that poem says, I'm the captain of my faith.
I just want to thank those who are responsible for giving me this opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. It's just nice to hear other positions and for you guys to hear from us our perspectives on healthcare. Dr. Burns and I were joking that sometimes when we treat patients that have little to no insurance or Medicaid, it's just like a nonprofit because you don't get paid that much. But when you become a physician, there's something on the inside that supersedes whether they have Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Cross, Cigna, Aetna. All of that stuff is second to making sure that that patient is in better health. Thank you.